This program is copyrighted. All rights are reserved. Reproduction in whole or in part, without the express prior written consent of the owner, is prohibited.
Well, thank you for joining us. November the 15th, 2024. Ask Your Herb Doctor on KMUD Garberville 91.1 FM. My name's Andrew Murray.
My name's Sarah Johannesson Murray. Welcome to this evening's show.
Okay, good. So we're going to carry on this month, finishing up last month's discourse about endocrine disruptors and pesticides, hormones, chemicals in our food supply, of which I think we're very glad to hear of Bobby Kennedy's involvement here in the routing out of the waste and the overarching regulatory environment and the bureaucracy and paybacks and all the money that supports all of this, and we can definitely do without chemicals in our foods, folks. Okay, so you're listening to Ask Your Herb Doctor, KMUD Garberville 91.1 FM, and from 7:30 until the end of the show, we'll open up the phone lines to take any questions from callers. Number is 707-923-3911. So my name's Andrew Murray, and our website is westernbotanicalmedicine.com. We can be reached toll-free at 1-888-WBM-HERB. We have a Western Botanical Medicine Twitter account, and that's at WBM-HERB. And our YouTube channel is Western Botanical Medicine, and links to both our Twitter and YouTube channel are also on our website, westernbotanicalmedicine.com. I do want to say at the beginning of this show that it's almost been 2 years since we lost Dr. Pete. And some of the show, like the continuation of most of what we talk about, is a continuation of his philosophy. But this show is also kind of dedicated to his continued ideals that I think are gaining more and more traction as time goes by. As I said at the very beginning of the show, the HHS position in the government here, headed by Robert Kennedy, is going to target a lot of the pesticides, hormones, chemicals that are poisoning our citizens. So all of you, whoever you are, doesn't matter which way you vote or what you believe or what color you are or whatever, we want better food. We want better, cleaner food that's less polluted, and big corporations don't have vested interests in to maintain the chemicals that keep us sick. So I don't know anybody who'd want to complain or argue with that. So let's see how the administration does and score them on their merits. Okay, so I think probably what I want to start with is we're going to carry on the last bit of last month's discourse on estrogen disruption, or the environmental toxins that are disrupting hormones, specifically with estrogen, and how they drive cancers and inflammatory conditions, and then carry on into more of a discourse on the natural aromatase inhibitors, which will prevent the conversion of testosterone to estrogen and will downregulate estrogen activity, have anti-inflammatory activity. And I want to bring out some of Dr. Pete's specifics on this and kind of give that over to him as a continued testimony to what he began 40 years ago, which I really think has truly made some groundbreaking inroads into how we think about these things, not just as people being educated by, this kind of show that brings out evidence to show what he was saying is valid, but just by market forces. Not that market forces are definitely dictated by profit, but that the industries that are entrenched in chemicals and pesticides and herbicides to main crops are definitely going to be called into question for the toxicity that's arising. And I think as citizens, we really need to make a voice heard that we want better food. And why does the same ingredient in Europe have three products in it, and in the States it has 10 or more? And so many of these things are absolutely not needed in the food, but yet they're all part and parcel of a big industry which is unfortunately quite slow to change, but financial pressure upon it by people not supporting it, and other better, cleaner alternatives that hopefully will be supported will hopefully help people see that what's happening to them physically really is just a process of the food that they're eating. So it all begins with what you put in your mouth and what you breathe and what you drink. So let's just kind of bear that in mind as we go through this discourse, finishing up last month's topic on endocrine disrupting chemicals and how ubiquitous they are. I mentioned last month and the month before that, when we opened the subject up, that European standards are so much better. And I'm not just saying that because I believe the EU or Europe or Britain is better than America. I absolutely don't. I think there's far more scope here for the pursuit of liberty and happiness and everything else that's enshrined in our Constitution. And I do believe that is actually a God-given right for us all. So the food quality in Europe, when you look at the ingredients, and they've been labeling packaging for food ingredients for as long as I can remember. I mean, it happened way before in the States. So back in the 70s and 80s, you'd pick up a box of breakfast cereal or a loaf of bread. You could see the ingredients that were in it. And at that point, they were already stripping out a lot of the chemicals that had been shown to be causing cancer and reproductive problems back then in the 70s and the 80s. And unfortunately, as I mentioned last month, there's still quite a few products that are self-regulated, unless they obviously cause a big enough scandal and are identified as such that puts pressure on the companies producing them to withdraw it. That actually it's more of a voluntary thing here in the States. And there's still some fairly toxic chemicals that are widely used. Fungicides are one of them, and certainly some of the herbicides are totally implicated in causing things like Parkinson's and other neurodegenerative diseases. So it's not an if or a how, but it needs to be, action needs to be taken. So to carry on the last month then, I wanted just to say that, give out some of these other examples of things that are still used in agriculture. And I really don't honestly think that most people recognize this. And I'm not saying that people are stupid or anything. People just don't have time for it. They're too busy paying a mortgage, getting the kids to school, buying groceries, trying to keep it all working on ever diminishing salaries in relation to the inflation that's going on or has gone on over the last 3 years. But things like thiram, I'll mention these chemicals now. So thiram, sodium N-methyl dithiocarbamate, and other dithiocarbamate fungicides are known to suppress the dopamine beta hydroxylase activity, leading to a reduced conversion of dopamine to norepinephrine. Now, this may lead to changes in hypothalamic catecholamine activity involved in generating the proestrous surge in LH, which stimulates the final stages of ovulation. And studies by Goldman et al. Concluded that this dithiocarbamate is able to block the LH surge and ovulation in rat models. Now, ketoconazole, another fungicide used in humans, inhibits various enzymes which belong to the CYP450 dependent monooxygenases, and also inhibits progesterone synthesis. So we've mentioned progesterone in relation to estrogen. Progesterone is a youth hormone. It's anti-inflammatory, anti-aging. And so all of those mechanisms that you would identify as a part of the aging process all involved cellular inflammation, degradation, death, lack of energy, mitochondrial dysfunction, water logging. These are all the things that lead to the death of the cell, whereas progesterone actually has a very supportive effect in all of those regards. So inhibition of progesterone secretion and poor conception occurred after malathion insecticide exposure at the onset of estrus in cattle, as an example of farming practices using endocrine disrupting organophosphate insecticides, which are still widely used. Now, they act as acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, most typically associated with venoms and poisons, and that's how these venoms and poisons work. They block acetylcholine. They're also used as biological warfare agents and nerve agents, but they're still used in farming today. Now, malathion is one of the 18 organophosphates currently in registration review as I mentioned last month, a lot of these things just don't come, well, they come up for re-registration every 5 years or so, unless they're voluntarily recalled. But actually, in the process in the States, is that almost entirely a voluntary recall process, whereas in England or the EU, they are actively targeted and legislated against. And whilst I'm not a big fan of over-regulation, I do understand that there has to be a time and a place for some kind of, control over it, so that people are not, rightfully so, harmed by these things in the food supply. So a review by Shaw examines how abnormal dopamine metabolism in autism has been influenced by environmental, microbial, and genetic factors. It focuses on the enzyme dopamine beta hydroxylase, which converts dopamine to norepinephrine, and how its activity is altered, contributing to autism symptoms. A strong correlation between the rise in autism incidence and the increased use of glyphosate, which disrupts gut microbiota by reducing beneficial bacteria and promoting the pathogenic bacterial genera Clostridia. And that Clostridia produces inhibitors of this same dopamine beta hydroxylase, which leads to excess dopamine and reduced norepinephrine, which are common in autism. We mentioned that fertility rates have declined significantly in recent years, while adverse reproductive outcomes have increased, partly due to pesticide exposure. Now, various endocrine disrupting chemicals like pesticides, phthalates, dioxins, and phytoestrogens affect Leydig cells, which produce androgens in males, the male hormones, and these can disrupt androgen production, causing reproductive issues in humans and animals. And bisphenol A, BPA, and phytoestrogens can lower testosterone levels, leading to underdeveloped male reproductive organs. And soy is definitely implicated in that, and the other soy products for the effects that they have. Now, endocrine disruptors affect a broad range of hormonal axes and physiological systems. Their effects have previously been divided into 6 types of toxicity, including reproductive, developmental, metabolic, neurotoxicity, immunotoxicity, respiratory toxicity, and carcinogenic effects. For a woman or couple considering a pregnancy, endocrine disrupting chemicals can affect conception, in utero development, neonatal life, as well as long-term child and maternal health. And there are several windows of vulnerability throughout this process, where the woman and the fetus are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of endocrine disruptors. The oocyte integrity is compromised by these endocrine disrupting chemicals through oxidative stress and apoptosis, and by reducing the number of antral follicles. This has transgenerational effects, which is something we need to consider, which are heritable or passed to the next generation if measures are not taken to correct this epigenetically with change agents like adaptogenic herbs, detoxification herbs, liver supportatives, which alter gene expression. Simple examples of these are things like milk thistle, ashwagandha, dandelion root, turmeric root, and burdock root. Now, pathological hormonal changes can affect gonad development both in utero and after birth, causing estrogen mimetic effects on male gametogenesis with testicular failure, and testosterone-related effects on female development, altering the onset of puberty and menarche, and increasing the risk of precocious puberty. During the first weeks of fetal life, critical fetal neurogenesis requires adequate quantities of thyroid hormone. Where maternal exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals interferes with thyroid function, dysfunctional neurogenesis can result. Some studies have linked prenatal endocrine exposure to cognitive and behavioral impairment, autistic spectrum disorders, and lower intelligent quotient scores for the child in later life. There are also diabetogenic effects of endocrine disrupting chemicals, which are exerted through 2 main pathways. Alterations in fetal development of the pancreatic beta cells and the immune system cause type 1 diabetes mellitus later in life, and separately, endocrine disruptor interference with glucose and lipid metabolism contribute to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes mellitus, as well as metabolic toxicity and obesity. So you have to see how important these things are in context. Number one, they're extremely small concentrations of these things which exert hormonal effects. I say it time and time again. We're looking at picogram, which is 10 to the minus 12. So a decimal point with 11 zeros and a 1 after it would be 1 picogram. And that's a concentration that we're talking about, which has a hormonal effect in a woman or a man, because that's the concentration at which a lot of these hormones act physiologically. So it's no surprise when they talk about the EPA will mention, maybe the problems with the contraceptive pill in cities and the water treatment plants that have trouble getting out all of these hormones from the water supply, as well as these things in plastics and other xenoestrogens, which contribute to the load hormonally and toxically. So we're talking about extremely small concentrations of product, and they have fairly massive effects. So as I say, there's a synergistic effect. And some of these endocrine disrupting chemicals are themselves obesogenic, promoting weight gain, slowing weight loss, increasing the volume of adipose fat cells, and subsequent increased bioaccumulation of endocrine disrupting chemicals. And so we have a vicious circle here where one begets the next. And so it becomes rapidly debilitating and very, very difficult to pull out of. I think the whole thing with Dr. Pete mentioned, obesity being a central problem is that it blocks energy metabolism, and energy is very necessary to pay for all the transactions that should occur in a functioning physiology and push hormones in the right direction, push enzymes in the right direction, maintain adequate immune system, brain health, bone remodeling, maintenance of regular homeostasis. It all requires energy. And so he was a very vociferous opponent of the polyunsaturated fatty acids as a poison to the metabolic machinery of the cell, and how this poisoned the cell, and then everything downstream of that suffered. The organism would gain more and more weight. Obviously, if they were eating PUFA, that weight would have been predominantly polyunsaturated fat stores. The fat stores themselves would further slow the thyroid, and the thyroid would further decouple from energy production and mitochondrial function, producing even more weight gain. So a vicious cycle.
I have a card I forgot to read and a comment and a question too, if I may. But first I'll let people know that the views and opinions expressed throughout the broadcast day on Redwood Community Radio are those of the speakers and not necessarily those of the station staff, underwriters, volunteers, etc. And I guess one comment I would have, because I'm very concerned about the estrogens and particularly phytoestrogens, but I'm under the understanding that adipose fat will turn testosterone into estrogen. Is that true? That it does, as opposed to other?
Yes, adipose fat is a storage
form.
Yes, well, a storage place is what I really want to say. A storage place. Fat tissue is a storage place for estrogens. And so even once a woman goes through menopause, they can still be releasing a lot of estrogens into circulation just from their fat cells, especially if they have a lot of fat cells.
I was actually talking more about men because...
And also, I was just going to go on to say, and also in men, extra weight, extra fat cells are another source, a storage place for estrogens. And if you lose weight too quickly, you release a lot of those estrogens into circulation, and that's hard on everything. But also, it's just constantly...
I thought it actually metabolized testosterone into estrogen or estrogen-like chemicals, which exacerbated the problem in addition to just storing them.
And I don't think it's not the fat tissue itself, it's just the action of aromatase being in place and allowing the conversion of testosterone to estrogen, or the increased ratio of testosterone to estrogen.
No, but the fat adipose tissue is actually a storage place for estrogen chemicals. But what you're talking about is where if you have too much aromatase, you will convert testosterone into estrogen. And that's where these herbs come into play, that they're aromatase inhibitors. So they actually block that conversion of a man's testosterone or a woman's testosterone, because we still have a little bit too, into estrogen. And the end chemical is estrogen that is inflammatory. So you want to have everything in balance so your testosterone stays as testosterone and not get converted into estrogen.
And so if you're doing a plant-based diet, what would be some plant-based proteins? So you wouldn't want the soybeans and the peas and stuff because they have a lot of estrogen. What would be a balanced, complete plant-based protein? Like, would quinoa and mushrooms do it? Or
mushrooms
We're
do
going to talk about mushrooms.
Yeah, mushrooms do block.
Right.
Mushrooms do block aromatase, but as far as protein goes, it's completely plant-based. Potatoes have a protein in them that's pretty high quality and does not increase aromatase.
And so what are other good vegetable sources of protein that are not
Fruits.
full of phytoestrogens?
Fruits have a lot of protein in them. I mean, not compared to dairy and eggs. So, I personally don't think that it's nutritionally easy at all. In fact, maybe not even possible to get adequate protein and adequate nutrients like vitamins A, D, E, and K, all the fat-soluble vitamins, from a purely plant-based diet. I think being a vegetarian is possible to get all those nutritional compounds you need, but I don't think that it's actually possible being a complete plant-based vegan. And if it is, you have to be extremely careful and really make sure you're eating specific foods and ample quantities of them.
Did you say there was a call or no? Okay.
No, that was just my question about
got it.
phytoestrogen low protein plants.
We're going to go through the whole, and it's a kind of a eulogy for Dr. Pete. We're going to go through the whole white button mushroom aromatase blocking activity and how actually there's PUFA that's involved in it. But the rationale, bring out Dr. Pete's rationale behind it, and people that listen will actually understand why and how it's doing it and what the main benefits are, obviously. So you're listening to Ask Your Herb Dr. KMD, Garberville 91.1 FM from 7:30 till the end of the show, 8 o'clock. You're invited to call in. The number here is 707-923-3911. So just to finish up the kind of endocrine disrupting chemical dialogue here, really, just want to say that these endocrine disruptors have also been detected in placenta and amniotic fluid. So they get around. I mean, they basically poison the system. They're not just locked up in the bone or locked up in the fat. They will end up in there for sure, but in circulation, they can even cross the placenta and get into, the fetus's amniotic fluid. Now, where they're definitely given and proposed to link it to adverse obstetric outcomes, including preterm birth, gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, and fetal growth restrictions. So these endocrine disrupting chemicals are not good for anybody, and they are ubiquitous. And in the American agricultural system, they're very prevalent. If you're buying conventional food, expect it. I would say if it's mass-produced, especially if it's small local farms who are just, they say they're not organic but they don't use chemicals, you've got a pretty good chance that the food's pretty clean. But anything that is commercially produced, you better believe that it's getting somewhat of a regular program of either pesticides, fungicides, or herbicides. It's just the way it is. I mean, any large monocrop. Okay, so within a certified organic environment, they're not allowed to do that. And so organic food, just by definition, will be much better for you. Okay. So I wanted just to carry on the rest of the evening here, looking at, I think, what will be a great possibility, a great potential, and just want to quickly say that we've probably all seen it and heard it, depending on what you're more interested in or what you want to watch. But it's not just what's on, kind of mainstream, computer screens or YouTubes or podcasts, but, coming out now in kind of literature. I think what I wanted to say was that the whole thing about McDonald's and the cooking of fries, French fries, in liquid oils, which is just one of those things that happens. There's going to be a quote unquote initiative and a move to start cooking these things again in tallow. So for those folks out there who are old enough to remember perhaps that, animal fat and beef fat typically were how things were cooked and fried back in the 40s and 50s, before the rise and advent of chemical processing and refining of seed oils. These things were just cooked in animal fat. And there's a very clear link between obesity, diabetes, and all of the other inflammatory diseases of our culture now can all be attributed to these polyunsaturates. Now, Dr. P just went on tirelessly campaigning for people to understand that saturated fats were actually much better for you, and they were not inflammatory. They didn't oxidize. They were much safer. So we'll have a look at the next coming years and see whether or not there is this concerted effort to get animal fat back in the food chain, especially in fast food outlets.
Or coconut oil.
If
you have a sustainable source, coconut oil is also very
saturated. There's going to be an economic reason probably to not go with coconut, I would imagine, but I think there's so much more animal fat around to be able to do that. Okay, so that's one thing. I think to understand that connection between the fast food of 1950 and the 1% or 2% of people that were obese in 1950 compared to the 60 or 70% obesity rates that we're seeing here in those people who do specifically eat fast foods, and how these foods are prepared has a direct relation to the poisoning of thyroid and the inflammatory activity of these polyunsaturates. So the kind of mandates that I'm seeing that are going to be part and parcel of the Human Health Services part of the next government is, and this is by Bobby Kennedy. He's going to head this up. So let's just wait and see what he actually gets done and what merits he can be assigned with after the term. So to combat the chronic disease epidemic is what he's kind of tirelessly campaigned on, and to eliminate toxins from our food, water and air, support sustainable farming and reduce chemical usage, preserve and restore natural ecosystems, and ensure regulatory agencies act in the public interest. So that all sounds pretty good to me. I don't care what side of the fence you're on. That sounds good to me. And then the Department of Health and Human Services oversees 13 agencies, including the FDA and the CDC. It oversees Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Health Care Act. And it's also responsible for caring for unaccompanied migrant children at the border. It has a $2 trillion budget. So hopefully these are all things that are going to get scrutinized now with the aim of making it better, making it cleaner, making it safer. I don't know anybody who would want to interfere with that process happening. So let's just see what the coming time brings.
It's just wonderful now to hear people like Bobby Kennedy coming out with the fact that these seed oils are harming our health, and we've been only eating them in massive quantities like this since, well, really probably since the 60s, but when they first became introduced in the 20s, because the seed oil farmers were no longer selling their seed oil to the paint industry, and the farmers needed to sell their oil. So they campaigned against coconut oil and against palm oil and pushed seed oils on humans. And the process to manufacture them is not very clean or safe. The oils themselves cause obesity. They knew that. The USDA knew that. It caused obesity in animals. And then it was promoted to farmers to use these because their animals got fatter quicker. So they were more valuable financially. So it's great now. Dr. Pete's been talking about this for, well, as long as I've known Dr. Pete. But before that, there's research that's been done that goes all the way back to the 30s. And Dr. Pete tirelessly talked about it, like Andrew mentioned. And it's great to see now it's becoming more mainstream.
It definitely is, just like all the acceptance of saturated fats versus polyunsaturates and sugars and salt. Okay. So to carry on then with aromatase blocking medicinal herbs and other products as a way of mitigating estrogen's inflammatory activity, both in males and females, certain medicinal herbs possess aromatase inhibiting properties, meaning they can reduce the conversion of androgens like testosterone to estrogens by inhibiting the enzyme aromatase. This activity can be beneficial in conditions where excess estrogen plays a role, such as hormone-sensitive cancers like breast cancer, benign prostatic hyperplasia in males, or gynecomastia. So what natural products and medicinal herbs have these activities then? So white button mushrooms. Let's get to talk about white button mushrooms and think about Dr. Pete. I think Dr. Pete may have actually mentioned white button mushrooms to begin with. I think one of the first times years ago.
Well, I think most mushrooms, but just because white button mushrooms are so readily available, and since they do have an anti-estrogen and they are aromatase blockers, you know, Dr. Pete liked to talk about things that everybody could reach and obtain, not the bizarre trumpet mushroom or oyster mushroom that some people can't afford and they can't even find in the grocery store. You can find white button mushrooms pretty much all over.
Okay, so white button mushrooms then, Agaricus bisporus. Some of the main compounds in this mushroom and other mushrooms, funnily enough, and I never really made the association between it because you don't really think about it being an oily mushroom or a fatty acid containing mushroom. The main compounds in it that they're saying are going to be responsible for its aromatase blocking activity are the same PUFAs that Dr. Pete was vehemently opposed to. And I'll tell you why. So linoleic and conjugated linoleic acid are identified as some of the main components in white button mushroom, in Antrodia cinnamomea, Cordyceps sinensis.
That's why you fry them in butter.
Cordyceps militaris, Coriolus versicolor, Ganoderma lucidum, so reishi, Grifola frondosa, Lentinula edodes, the shiitake, and Pleurotus austriatus, the oyster mushroom.
But it's very low levels.
Okay, so the white button mushroom actually has some of the highest levels here. Now it contains
for a mushroom, high levels for a mushroom, but compared to seed oil.
Well, yeah. Okay, so hang on. So the main mechanism by which it's doing this is these phytochemicals that directly inhibit aromatase enzyme activity. The studies have shown that the extracts of white button mushroom reduce estrogen levels and slow the growth of hormone-sensitive breast cancers. And this is applicable in postmenopausal women with breast cancer and in reducing estrogen-dependent tumor growth. Now, why? Why does the white button mushroom stand out? So, firstly, by direct enzyme inhibition. Studies show that phytochemicals in white button mushrooms specifically inhibit aromatase activity, making them highly effective for reducing estrogen synthesis. There's also preclinical evidence showing that in research, particularly in breast cancer models, it demonstrates significant suppression of tumor growth through estrogen reduction, even at dietary levels. And specifically, unlike many other herbs that modulate multiple pathways, white button mushrooms directly target aromatase without significantly affecting other hormonal pathways, minimizing unwanted effects. So as far as the effects of PUFA that Dr. Pete had spent most of his academic career talking about, writing about, and being a proponent of the opposition to PUFAs, its metabolic effects then. So Dr. Pete argued that PUFA suppresses thyroid function by interfering with the conversion of thyroxine T4 to triiodothyronine T3. Now, PUFAs promote inflammation by increasing prostaglandin and lipid peroxide synthesis. They also inhibit mitochondrial energy production, exacerbating metabolic insufficiency. So to talk about estrogens and PUFAs in the context here of using white button mushrooms.
I just want to say that the French did a study on 1 teaspoon of seed oil per day, and they found that it blocked the thyroid in 5 different locations in humans. So it's pretty potent. If you ever eat any fried food that's fried in these seed oils, you'll easily be eating way more than a teaspoon of oil.
Okay, so PUFAs worsen estrogen dominance by disrupting hormonal balance and increasing stress-related cortisol production, which synergizes with estrogen's suppressive effects on the thyroid. So the estrogen blocking effects, and to go over white button mushrooms as aromatase inhibitors, they contain bioactive fatty acids, including linoleic acid, which inhibit the enzyme aromatase, reducing the conversion of androgens, as I said, testosterone to estrogens. The key compounds, linoleic acids, omega-6, are PUFA directly implicated in aromatase inhibition. Now, conjugated linolenic acids, they are bioactive isomers of linolenic acid that modulate estrogen signaling and have been shown to suppress aromatase activity. So these fatty acids compete with other substrates for binding to the aromatase enzyme, effectively reducing its activity. And white button mushrooms also contain polysaccharides and other phytochemicals that may synergize with these fatty acids in reducing estrogen production. So I want to discuss this in the context of synergy, along with a little bit later on curcumin and piperine as a synergistic adjunct, and then chrysin also. So the dose-dependent effects of PUFA then, so kind of to reconcile this paradox that these PUFAs act to block aromatase, and that's a good thing because blocking the conversion of androgens to estrogens is definitely a good thing. And how the paradox is discussed and brought out to show that the benefit outweighs the risk. So while Dr. Peat criticized dietary PUFAs for their systemic effects, the concentrations of linoleic acid and related compounds in white button mushrooms may not contribute significantly to total PUFA load in the body when consumed in moderation. And the local aromatase inhibitory effects of these fatty acids could outweigh their potential systemic thyroid suppressive or inflammatory actions, especially when consumed in a nutritionally balanced context. So let's discuss the synergistic anti-estrogenic effects.
Well, I think you need to point out, too, that even though you might avoid all of the seed oils and only eat fats from saturated sources like animals or coconut or palm and butter, I mean, it's from an animal, but all of those all of the animal fats all contain a little bit of PUFA in them anyways. But what happens when you have a seed oil in combination with a saturated fat, the saturated fat actually helps protect the rapid oxidation of the seed oil. And so if you are to eat any type of seed oil, if you had it with some saturated fat, that definitely helps prevent the rapid oxidation process that occurs once a seed oil gets into a warm body that's 98.6 or 99 degrees and loaded with oxygen. The seed oil just will go rancid quickly, very quickly. And that causes the inflammation and the damage. And that's what is blocking arteries up, because it's causing such a free radical reaction inside the arteries and causing heart disease, amongst all the other problems that PUFAs cause.
So the estrogen blocking effects of white button mushrooms may arise then from a combination of PUFA and other non-PUFA compounds such as sterols or phenolics. And this complex interaction might mitigate the negative aspects of PUFAs when used strategically. So from Dr. Peat's perspective, the occasional use of white button mushrooms for aromatase inhibition might be justified due to their anti-estrogenic effects, which can relieve estrogen's thyroid suppressive and inflammatory actions. And this aligns with Dr. Peat's broader goal of reducing estrogen dominance while minimizing systemic PUFA accumulation. So the use of PUFA in specific localized or pharmacological contexts, that is, reducing estrogen via aromatase inhibition, may have therapeutic benefits without contradicting Dr. Peat's broader dietary principles, and this reflects a nuanced view. While PUFAs are problematic in excess or chronic dietary exposure, their targeted effects on estrogen metabolism can still align with Dr. Peat's goal of improving thyroid function and metabolic health. And Dr. Peat also and often emphasize the importance of whole foods rather than isolated compounds. The anti-estrogenic activity of white button mushrooms likely arises from the synergy, both of PUFAs, phenolics, and polysaccharides, which could offset the negative effects of PUFA alone. So whilst white button mushrooms contain PUFA like linoleic acid and conjugated linolenic acid, which Dr. Peat critiques, their aromatase inhibiting and anti-estrogenic effects offer clear benefits in reducing estrogen dominance, a key goal in Dr. Peat's philosophy. So this paradox highlights the complexity of food compounds and suggests that within the broader context of Dr. Peat's dietary strategy, the occasional use of white button mushrooms for their aromatase inhibitory effects is consistent with his overarching emphasis on reduced estrogen and thyroid support.
I also want to mention that we've talked a lot about herbs that are blocking estrogen through being aromatase inhibitors, but there's also an herb that helps increase progesterone, which helps balance estrogen in both males and females, and it's called chaste tree. The Latin name is Vitex agnus cassis, and that herb helps promote progesterone production. And also using progesterone helps to block estrogen in several places. And we like to use Kenogen's Progesti. That's a 90% vitamin E with a 10% progesterone, and you can use it topically, and you can also use it internally, and it's very effective at helping to block estrogen.
So let's continue with anti-aromatase activity and compounds, medicinal herbs and compounds which definitely offer that benefit. So chrysin, C-H-R-Y-S-I-N, chrysin, is a flavonoid from passion flower. It's also found in honey and bee propolis. It's found in the silver linden, Tilia tomentosa. It's found in Alpinia galanga. It's found in Scutellaria bicalensis, and also in German chamomile. So these particular herbs contain chrysin, and chrysin again is another aromatase inhibitor. But as it's relatively poorly absorbed, an adjunct like piperine from black pepper is useful. So I want to talk about synergy again. We talked about the synergy between the other phytochemicals within mushrooms and the PUFA that act synergistically to have a much greater benefit than risk. And now I wanted to mention chrysin in relation to an adjunct like piperine, which greatly improves the absorption and bioavailability. And then we'll talk about curcuma, turmeric, in conjunction with piperine and the research showing how much more available that is. And then also capsaicin, which is the chili pepper, which definitely has been used in herbal medicine as an adjunct forever. And so the reasons for this is that it definitely potentiates the absorption and availability of other naturally occurring phytochemicals. And so it's a total synergist. Okay. So chrysin then is a flavonoid that acts as a potent aromatase inhibitor. It binds to the aromatase enzyme, reducing its activity. Studies in vitro demonstrate its effectiveness in lowering estrogen levels, but bioavailability in humans is limited unless combined with bioenhancers like piperine from black pepper. The same has been mentioned in relation to curcumin, the main constituent from turmeric, which possesses strong anti-inflammatory activity, and consuming chrysin-rich herb sources with a fat-rich meal also has similar bioenhancing effects. Now, it's used as a supplement to modulate estrogen levels, especially in bodybuilding and hormone-sensitive conditions. And I remember Dr. Peat talking a lot about, in the early days, he had a big following of bodybuilders, which is really kind of humorous because Dr. Peat was absolutely not anybody you would ever imagine who'd be related to bodybuilding.
Well, I mean, Dr. Peat was a fit man.
He was definitely fit. But
when I asked him, I said, do you know there's a bunch of bodybuilders that are following your work? And he said, oh, yes. And then I said, do you lift weights? And he said, oh, no.
And this is all because these guys want to increase their testosterone and block aromatase, so they maximize their testosterone production for muscle mass and muscle building. So again, the applications then of chrysin, just to reiterate, modulating estrogen levels, especially in bodybuilding and hormone-sensitive conditions. Now, gynecomastia is one of those things that in England, I probably see it here too, but in England, always associated with beer drinking in males. Okay. I mentioned last month, I think, that hot pickers in England, female hot pickers in Kent in England, regularly in the 1900s, it was well known and well recorded that they would all lose their menstrual cycle purely from the estrogenic effects of the hop. It kind of acted like a hormone replacement, like an OCP, or a contraceptive, high estrogen blocked
and it's important to point out in our local culture here, cannabis is also very, very estrogenic and can affect your menstrual cycles as well as your hormone levels of estrogen because it's estrogenic like the hops are.
Okay, so gynecomastia, then the kind of abnormal breast development in males. Exactly. That again can come from drinking too much beer, and that's because the beer is fermented with fairly high levels of hops, and humulene and lupulene have that activity and promote aromatase and actually increase the conversion of testosterone into estrogen, and so men develop breasts. All right. So the activity then of piperine, which is a black pepper extract, which is actually 3 to 8% of black pepper is piperine, so it's really easy to make an extract of it, inhibits enzymes like CYP34A4 and P-glycoprotein, which metabolize or efflux compounds from cells. It prolongs the plasma half-life of co-administered compounds. So it enhances the absorption by increasing intestinal permeability of intestinal cells, and piperine has been shown to increase bioavailability of curcumin by as much as 2,000%. Yeah, whoa, I know. And you don't need much of it either. So, as used in this way, this combination is ideal for hormone-sensitive cancers, chronic inflammation, and estrogen excess. The same can be said for males to increase their testosterone by blocking aromatase and lowering their estrogen levels, particularly in prostate inflammation, as I said, gynecomastia, and low testosterone in males. Okay. Do you want to say something, Sarah?
No, I just want to say that, callers are invited to call in with any questions they have related or unrelated to this month's topic. It is 7:48, almost 10 minutes till the top of the hour. So I just would like to have
3911.
Yes, we'd like callers to call in soon if they have a question, please, so that we don't have to cut you off at the end of the show.
Okay, so other aromatase inhibitors and green tea extract, Camellia sinensis. So epigallocatechin gallate, EGCG, well known. It basically reduces aromatase expression and activity, inhibits the estrogen receptor signaling, makes this green tea kind of doubly effective in hormone-sensitive conditions. Studies show a reduction in breast cancer risk and tumor growth in preclinical models, and regular consumption may support hormonal balance and cancer prevention. I won't say too much about flaxseed because it's in the same kind of group as the, white bun mushroom in terms of its compounds. Let's go on to pomegranate. The active compound here is ellagic acid, and this again inhibits aromatase activity and may modulate estrogen receptor activity. It has potential anti-cancer effects again in hormone-sensitive cancers, used as a dietary supplement or extract for estrogen balance and cancer prevention. And then turmeric, we've mentioned turmeric being potentiated synergistically with the addition of piperine, increases its bioavailability about 2,000 times. And also to mention that fat-rich meals are also implicated in producing a much greater bioavailability than in the absence of fatty meals. So to eat turmeric in conjunction with ghee, like you would in Indian cooking, would be a complete no-brainer, and or to use it with the other fatty products in cooking. But kind of Indian cooking totally sums up that picture of the fat and curcuma.
And just a side note about flaxseed, since you did mention that, and they do have a compounds called phytoestrogens, and phytoestrogens can block the receptor and prevent the more potent estrogens that are present in our body from sitting in the receptor. So they can lower estrogen in that way, and also because flax seeds, if they're ground up and they're eaten like a extra fiber added to the diet, they can help to reduce estrogens through excretion in the bowel. But if you're trying to lower your estrogens, adding flax seeds can be an added estrogen, even if it does block your own natural estrogen. And it's much safer to use things like slippery elm powder as a bulk laxative.
Okay, I think we have a caller on the air. So, caller, you're on the air. Where from, and what's your question?
Yes, I'd like to know, I got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine shot, and I'd like to know if that affects the heart, except in the food, like what you were talking about in that one thing. Do you know the question that I'm asking about?
And we were talking about something to do with the food and the heart.
With
like, you mean
vaccines.
the vaccines, but what were to do with food? Were you mentioning the food like I was mentioning, like heart disease?
No. You said that it don't take the food that it normally takes. It takes another type of food, but that's the reason why, like, professional football players fell down dead on the playing field.
Yeah, well, we did do a show, probably. I can't remember how many months ago it was that we did this show where the Japanese came out with a study showing the glucose versus lactic acid metabolism of the heart, and how they were just studying these patients that had cancer, and they noticed that the patients who had the PET scan for their cancer, their heart muscle took up that contrast in much more readily in people who had had the vaccine, showing that the vaccine had altered the heart's metabolism of sugar, and that could have been contributing to why people are noticing an increase in heart attacks and myocarditis.
But my question is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, is it the same thing that you're talking about as far as messing with the heart thing?
I don't know what to say. I'm not sure what to say. It would be difficult to point the finger categorically and say that this was going to be a problem. I think all of the vaccines, whether it's Merck or Pfizer or any of the other, had issues and multifactorial issues. So,
well, we don't know which in that Japanese study. They didn't specify which vaccine those patients that had cancer were given. They didn't. They didn't specify.
All right. Thank you for as much information as you could give me, man.
I'll throw it out that the Johnson & Johnson was the viral vector, whereas the other two major ones were an mRNA platform. So the viral vector is a much older technology, and is. I mean, so there's probably a difference. There's probably more difference between that one and the other two than there are between the other two.
That's a good
but
point,
you certainly
Michael.
should have a lot more research in all of that.
Yes. So it was made differently, ma'am. The vaccine was manufactured differently with older technology rather than the very new technology that was used in the Moderna.
Though still not the old technology. It's the new technology from 15 years ago or whatever.
Right.
It's not the old inactivated vaccine or a protein subunit. It's the second generation.
Yes, but it wasn't quite the same technology that Pfizer and Moderna used. Yeah, so I'm sorry.
Okay,
I'm sorry I don't know enough about that study that showed the heart inflammation from the vaccine, which vaccine those patients had received.
All right. Thank you for answering what you could, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you for your call.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, well, it's 7:54. If anybody has a question they want to get in quickly, we're more than happy to take the call. So 707-923-3911. Otherwise, we will just keep going until the top of the hour or thereabouts. Okay, so looking at, as I said, the synergistic effect, don't underestimate it. I think that's the entire rationale when we were studying 24 years ago, that when they were coming out, these isolated, what they call them, active ingredients, and these APIs, these active pharmaceutical ingredients, which are produced by the pharmaceutical industry, are just the single chemical in complete isolation to the natural product it was produced from, having been actually fairly dangerous compared to the synergistic effects of that chemical within a balanced whole organism. So we've already mentioned that a bit earlier on. So let's just take this other caller before we get off here. Caller, you're on the air. Where are you from? What's your question? And we got to be fairly quick.
I just wanted to thank you very, very much for your show and your opinions and your factual information that you're sharing, because I've been having an experience like, well, all of us have with Thank Jobs Friday, and this morning, like, Sue has literally been canceled, and they've been smearing Bobby Kennedy, and just, I really, really, really appreciate you guys so much for this intelligent dialogue and the research and the work you're doing in getting this message out. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I've lost some faith in K-Mud, and yet now I'm hearing this. And this is awesome.
Good. Well, let's hope the board of KMUD hear that, as well as any other problems they have when people call up about our quote-unquote political perspective on it, which is not a political show, or that we are, quoting misinformation, or we are not scientific or factual. That is what we have from the very beginning set out to be. Dr. Pete was extremely scientific. He could back up anything he said with facts. And so everything that we brought out, it may seem countercurrent to mainstream. It absolutely is most of the time, because the mainstream is absolutely corrupt. And so, I appreciate your call there, caller. And it's a radio station's a free speech radio station, right? We support KMUD. KMUD is the wider voice of a collective community of people. So let's not silence one another. That's what the socialists do. They silence you. They put you in some boot camp and take away your rights. Well, that's not America. So let's have free speech. And you know what? If you've got a big enough perspective and you can argue with me scientifically, go ahead. We'll talk about it. That's free speech, and this is Free Speech Radio. So we're here. If we counteract the mainstream, great. If the mainstream are obviously given airtime, great. Let's just talk about it.
Yeah, let's promote KMUD as a platform where both sides are heard.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see here. We're getting to the top of the hour. We better just wrap it up here. So our website is westernbotanicalmedicine.com. We've been producing certified organic extracts for 20 years, probably more like 21 or 22 years coming now. We're licensed medical herbalists. We did a degree in herbal medicine in England, and have been practicing here in the Pacific Northwest ever since 2001. So bringing out scientific information based on facts, not conspiracy theories or just opinion. And I want to just help people see alternatives and recognize that there is always an alternative. So my name's Andrew Murray.
My name's Sarah Johannesson Murray. Thank you. Good night, and have a happy Thanksgiving.
See you in December.
This program is copyrighted. All rights are reserved. Reproduction in whole or in part without the express prior written consent of the owner is prohibited.